How to grow food fast is a video I recently uploaded to YouTube, and this is a continuation of that video. On this segment here, we were talking about aerobic compost, and we had 3 ingredients: carbon, greens, and manure. And I described how to mix them, and I described how to turn them over to continue them to be aerobic, which means with oxygen. Added some ingredients to this video, and now we're going to get into the 3 ingredients a little more in depth. So let's start with that carbon. We're talking about how each of these 3 main ingredients are going to be divided into thirds. It does not have to be exact. You can, I've played around with this long enough to know now that you can have one of them at a quarter and then the other 2 kind of evenly mixed, and it'll still go. What you're kind of looking for is a 25 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen in the whole pile. That's just an average. I think I've done it with far less than 20, and I've had some pretty wild piles up above that, and you can kind of tell when it gets to be a low carbon count and a higher nitrogen count, the pile gets pretty greasy and starts getting smelly. And on the opposite, if you have too much carbon, the pile begins to cool down. So you can kind of play with that back and forth. And of course, I'm not a scientist. I'm not measuring every little aspect of this, so it's just kind of going by instinct. On the carbon side, there isn't a huge list that I have available to me here. Obviously, we have leaves. Everybody's got leaves. There's trees everywhere. Pile them up in the fall and save them for the next year's compost pile. Another one that I have purchased is chopped straw. Oftentimes it's mixed with some of the manures, and the reason why I highlight chopped is because if you get the straw in its full length, it'll cling to the pile, and you're trying to get that fork full of material out of the pile, and that straw will be strung out like little fingers into that pile, and it's hard to pull it out sometimes, and it's going to wear you out. It wears me out anyway. Around here we have dried grasses. If you wait until the fall, wait until the spring, a lot of these grasses are fairly loose and easy to pull apart, so you're not worried about them being stringy. We have canary grass around here, and I can get a very large amount of canary grass. I mean, by the time the spring comes along, the snow's got it all laying out down on the ground. But you just go along with your fingers, and you're just grabbing handfuls of it, and it just pulls right up. You can get a lot of it fast. Of course, along with the dried grasses, you're talking about all the various weeds. The stems will be weakened by the winter, and I mean, a lot of times they'll be laying on the ground too, and you just kind of pulling it together and pulling it out and putting it in your bushel basket. And then the one that we're going to talk about a little bit is sawdust. Sawdust has a up to 500 carbon to 1 nitrogen ratio, and that's very high. You can snuff out your pile by putting too much sawdust in, but I've found that I can go pretty high with this because the sawdust has a lot of surface on it because they're such small pieces. There's a lot of surface for the nitrogen to react with, and I've gotten to be pretty high sawdust ratio. That's why I say I might have got into the 40s or 50 to 1 ratio. The only thing you got to be careful of is that it dries out quickly, so you're adding a lot more water to keep this pile stimulated. Okay, greens. That's a longer list. I have a lot of greens here that I'm harvesting that I actually have planted on the property. And my main go-to green is comfrey. Actually, we received a root from a lady in the 1980s. She was in her 90s. Her name was Dr. Poppy, and she was a kind of a holistic doctor, and we brought our children there, and she gave us the roots. And after participating in a permaculture design course, I found out the importance of this plant, and we had that plant the whole time. What was that? Probably 87, 88 we got the plant, and in 2013 I took the course. After I took the course, I began to divide that plant up and plant it all over the property, and I might have 30 plants now. And it provides a lot of comfrey leaves. A couple of good points of comfrey. One is it has a very high nitrogen ratio. At some points, I've used it to rekindle a pile that had gone cold. Also, it's one of the very few plants that accumulates iodine. Very good. I've also experimented the last couple of years. I only want to really make my piles in the spring, and then I want to grow in that space where I make my compost. I want to grow crops in it the rest of the year. So what I've done is in midsummer and late summer, I'll cut all that comfrey off, and I put it in a barrel, fill it with water, and I got a spin top on it. I spin the top, and that comfrey ferments in that water and stays green. And now I can use it as my green material in the early spring when there isn't a lot growing. Number one go-to plant. Next one is stinging nettles. And these two both are element accumulators. Stinging nettles, be sure you wear your gloves. If you're getting it early in the season, it's only a foot or two high. You don't have to worry too much about breaking it apart. But if you're doing a middle of the season compost pile and you have these long stems, you want to chop them up, or you'll have the same problems that you have with straw that's not chopped. Yarrow. Let's say yarrow because it also is a element accumulator. It's not a good plant for early spring compost. So again, you want to save some of the yarrow along with the comfrey in the barrels. The comfrey, by mid-May, you can be harvesting a pretty tall leaf already. And I've been doing my compost piles in the month of May. I start in early May, and in the second and third weeks of May, I'm actually adding comfrey to the pile to keep it hot. Yarrow, on the other hand, is just little bitty plants by the end of May, so there's not a lot to grab. But it's a good one to save in the barrel, or if you're doing, like I said, other than spring composting. Here's another favorite of mine, burdock. In the spring of the year, when the soil's wet, you can pull it out right by the roots, and I compost the roots and all. Just chop it up. That's all I got to worry about. Here's another one for the spring. Rhubarb. You can eat too much rhubarb. I got a lot growing here. I don't want to eat it all. It's a fantastic green for early compost because it's one. I mean, right now it's coming out of the ground here, and it's just the 13th of March, middle of March. Okay, we have long grass. It's a good one. Not necessarily for the elements, but for the nitrogen and its small size, after it goes through a lawnmower, interacts quickly with the pile. You can throw a whole bushel of long grass in the pile as you're flipping it, and 2 days later there isn't a speck of grass anywhere. The bacteria really likes to eat it. And one other that I don't get very often, but it's worthy to mention is watercress. The reason why I like it has a higher iodine accumulation to it. And we have a shortage of iodine in the soil here. Okay, one other to talk about. Let's see here. Let's use this one. Manure. I've only ever used 3 different types of manure. One was chicken. Problem with chicken manure is it's very wet. The chickens urinate through their manure. They don't urinate apart from it. It's very stinky, and it gets clumpy. And you're constantly trying to break those clumps apart. The next is cattle. It also is clumpy. It can be wet if the farmer you're getting it from scoops up the urine along with the manure. And it can be stinky, but it doesn't really linger very many flips. It's stinky when you bring it in, and it quickly dissipates the smell. And then the one that I always like using, that I always look to first, is horse manure. It's kind of dry. It seems to have a lot of fiber in it. It fires up the pile. It's got decent nitrogen to carbon ratio, N to C ratio. And I actually have a place I get it from, and he mixes it with wood shavings. So it takes care of my carbon part of the pile along with the manure together. Although I still add some of these other carbon materials, I have a lot of it taken care of with the material that I bring in. So that is our composting story. Yeah, I could probably think about another one that I have to add to this, but for now, we're going to end the video, and I thank you very much for watching.